It was one of those bitter winter Sundays that made you question why anyone would choose to live in a place where the air hurt your face. Tom pulled his worn jacket tighter as he watched his 8-year-old daughter Annie feed the ducks that stubbornly remained at Riverside Park, despite the cold. "Dad, this one looks hungry," Annie called, her breath forming little clouds in the frigid air. Tom smiled, grateful for these simple moments with his daughter. Since losing his wife to cancer 3 years ago, these weekend outings had become their sacred tradition. No matter how tight money was, and working as a software engineer at Reynolds Technology barely covered their modest apartment and Annie's school needs, he always made time for what mattered most. "Just 2 more pieces of bread." "Sweetheart," he called back, "we don't want them getting too dependent on people's food." Annie carefully broke off another small piece from her bag, her face serious with concentration. Her pink hat was pulled low over her ears, and her mismatched mittens, one blue, one purple, both hand-me-downs from a neighbor's child, were dusted with breadcrumbs. Tom checked his watch. It was getting colder, and he had promised Annie hot chocolate at the cafe on their way home. "5 more minutes, then we'll warm up with that hot chocolate I promised." Annie nodded but was distracted by something across the park. "Dad, why is that girl on the ice?" "The signs say danger." Tom turned to look where Annie was pointing. About 50 yards away, a teenage girl was walking cautiously on the frozen pond, her phone held out in front of her as if taking photos or video. She was alone, moving farther from the edge with each step. Even from this distance, Tom could see the ice wasn't thick enough. Patches looked dangerously thin. "Stay here," he told Annie firmly, setting down their backpack. "Don't move from this spot." He started walking quickly toward the pond, waving his arms to get the girl's attention. "Hey, the ice isn't safe." "You need to come back." The girl looked up, startled, but didn't move toward shore. Instead, she called back, "It's fine. I've been out here for 5 minutes already." Tom broke into a jog, his unease growing as he saw how far out she was. Other park visitors were starting to notice, a small crowd forming at the pond's edge. "Please come back now. The ice near the middle won't hold." The girl rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed at his concern. She took another step backward and raised her phone higher, apparently trying to get a better angle for her photo. That's when Tom heard it. A sound like a gunshot that cut through the winter air. A crack had split the ice beneath the girl's feet. For one frozen moment, she stood perfectly still, eyes wide with sudden fear. Then the ice gave way, and she plunged into the dark water with a scream that cut off too quickly. Without hesitation, Tom sprinted the remaining distance to the pond's edge, shrugging off his jacket as he ran. He could hear people shouting, someone yelling about calling 911. But all he could think about was how cold that water would be and how little time the girl would have before hypothermia set in. "Stay back," he shouted to the gathering crowd. "And someone please watch my daughter, the little girl in the pink hat." He didn't wait to see if anyone acknowledged his request. Lowering himself onto the ice, he lay flat to distribute his weight and began to crawl toward the hole where the girl had disappeared. The ice was slick under his hands, burning cold even through his gloves. 20 feet out, he paused, listening. A splashing sound and desperate gasping came from ahead. She was still fighting. "Good, I'm coming," he called. "Try to hold on to the edge of the ice." He could see her now, her head barely above water, hands scrabbling at the broken edge that kept crumbling under her grip. Her face was already taking on a bluish tint, her movements becoming less coordinated with each second. 5 more feet to go, and the ice beneath him creaked ominously. He spread his arms and legs wider, trying to distribute his weight more evenly as he inched forward. 3 feet, too, grab my hand," he called, stretching his arm toward her. The girl tried to reach for him, but her arm fell short, splashing back into the water. Her eyes were growing unfocused, her struggles weaker. Tom knew he had seconds, not minutes. He slid forward until he was at the very edge of the broken ice. Taking a deep breath, he plunged his upper body into the water, reaching for her coat. The cold hit him like a physical blow, forcing the air from his lungs. For a moment, his brain seemed to short-circuit from the shock. Then survival instincts and adrenaline kicked in. His fingers found fabric and closed tight. Using every ounce of strength, Tom pulled, dragging the girl toward the more solid ice. She was limp now, her eyes closed. Bad sign. With one arm, he hoisted her upper body onto the ice surface, then carefully backed away, pulling her with him inch by inch. The journey back to shore felt endless. His clothes were freezing to his skin. and his muscles screamed with the effort of dragging both his weight and the girl's across the ice. He could hear shouts from the shore encouraging him, someone saying an ambulance was 3 minutes out. Finally, hands reached for them, pulling them the last few feet onto solid ground. Tom collapsed onto his back, gasping, but only allowed himself a moment's rest. The girl wasn't breathing. "Does anyone know CPR?" he asked, looking at the faces around him. A few people shook their heads. Others looked away. "Dad." Annie's voice cut through the crowd. She was being held back by a woman in a red coat, tears streaming down her face. "It's okay, sweetie. Stay there." Tom turned his attention back to the girl. Her lips were blue, her skin gray. No pulse when he checked her neck. He'd taken a CPR class years ago when Annie was born. The instructor's voice seemed to echo in his head now. "Push hard and fast in the center of the chest. Don't be afraid to break ribs. Better broken ribs than death." Tom positioned his hands and began compressions, counting under his breath. After 30, he tilted the girl's head back, pinched her nose, and gave 2 rescue breaths. Her chest rose slightly. He returned to compressions. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on, breathe." 2 minutes passed. His arms ached, but he didn't stop. In the distance, sirens wailed, getting closer. 3 minutes. The girl remained unresponsive. "Sir, maybe you should," someone began, but Tom cut them off with a sharp shake of his head. "Not stopping," he gasped between compressions. "Not until the paramedics get here. 4 minutes." The sirens were very close now. Tom's vision was starting to blur with exhaustion, his own body temperature dangerously low. And then, a cough. Water trickled from the corner of the girl's mouth. Another cough, stronger this time, and then she was gasping, her eyes fluttering open in confusion and fear. "You're okay," Tom said, gently turning her onto her side as she coughed up more water. "Help is almost here. Just breathe." Relief washed over him so strongly he nearly collapsed. The girl's eyes found his, confused but grateful. "You jumped in?" she whispered between ragged breaths. Before he could answer, paramedics pushed through the crowd, quickly taking over. They wrapped the girl in thermal blankets and lifted her onto a stretcher, firing questions about how long she'd been underwater, her current symptoms. "Sir, you need medical attention too," one paramedic told Tom. Noticing his soaking clothes and blue-tinged lips, Tom shook his head. "I'm fine. Just take care of her." He looked around for Annie and spotted her still with the woman in the red coat, both watching wide-eyed. "Dad!" Annie broke free and ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist despite his wet clothes. "I'm okay, sweetheart," he assured her, hugging her tightly. His jacket appeared, handed to him by a stranger, and he gratefully wrapped it around his shoulders. As the paramedics loaded the girl into the ambulance, Tom gathered his and Annie's things. The crowd was beginning to disperse, people talking excitedly about what they'd witnessed. A few patted Tom's back or shook his hand as they passed, calling him a hero. The word made him uncomfortable. He wasn't a hero, just a dad who couldn't stand by while someone's child was in danger. He would have wanted someone to do the same for Annie. "Did you save her life, Dad?" Annie asked as they walked slowly toward the park exit, Tom's arm around her shoulders. Tom thought about the girl's blue lips, the way she hadn't been breathing when he'd pulled her from the water. "I think maybe I helped," he said simply. "Like a superhero," Annie said with certainty. Tom smiled tiredly. "No, sweetie, just like a dad." That night, after tucking Annie into bed with extra hugs and reassurances, Tom took a long, hot shower, finally allowing himself to feel the full impact of the day's events. His muscles ached, and he had a nasty scrape across his forearm from the ice. But all he could think about was the girl, whether she was truly okay, whether there had been lasting damage from her time underwater. He hadn't given the paramedics his information. It hadn't seemed important in the moment. Now he wondered if he should have stayed, made sure she was all right, spoken to her parents. Too late now. Tomorrow he would return to his cubicle at Reynolds Technology, resume his ordinary life as a software engineer and single dad. The incident at the park would become just another story, fading with time like all memories eventually did. What Tom didn't know, couldn't know, was that the ripples from his actions that day were just beginning to spread. His ordinary life was about to become extraordinary in ways he could never have imagined. The morning sun streamed through the blinds as Mike rubbed his tired eyes. He hadn't slept well since the incident at the lake 3 days ago. The memory of pulling that teenage girl from the icy water kept replaying in his mind. Her blue lips, the way her body had felt so lifeless under his hands as he performed CPR. He'd left as soon as the ambulance arrived, never learning her name or if she'd fully recovered. "Dad, I can't find my science notebook." His daughter Penny's voice broke through his thoughts. "Check under your bed, sweetie. That's where it was last time." Mike called back, pulling himself out of bed. Single parenthood was a constant juggling act, but he wouldn't trade it for anything. Penny was his world, his reason for pushing forward after his wife's death 4 years ago. He glanced at the clock, 7:15 a.m. "We need to leave in 20 minutes, he shouted, hurrying to the kitchen to make Penny's lunch. An hour later, Mike walked through the glass doors of Reynolds Technology, where he'd worked as a software engineer for the past 6 years. He nodded at the security guard and headed toward his cubicle, mind already racing through the day's coding challenges. "Mike!" His supervisor Alex appeared suddenly beside his desk. "Ms. Chen wants to see you in her office." Right away, Mike's stomach dropped. Veronica Chen was the CEO, a woman he'd only glimpsed from afar at company meetings. She had a reputation for being brilliant but demanding. Being summoned to her office without warning couldn't be good news. "Did she say what it's about?" Mike asked, mentally reviewing his recent projects for any mistakes. Alex shook his head. "No idea, but she seemed different. Not angry, just intense." Mike straightened his tie and took the elevator to the top floor, his mind racing. Was this about the Henderson project? Had he missed a deadline? Or worse, was this a layoff? He couldn't afford to lose this job, not with Penny's school expenses and the mortgage payments. The CEO's assistant gave him a curious look as she ushered him into the spacious corner office. Ms. Chen stood with her back to him, looking out over the city skyline. She was smaller than he expected, her posture rigid in her tailored suit. "Ms. Chen, you wanted to see me." Mike's voice came out steadier than he felt. When she turned, Mike was startled to see her eyes were red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. This powerful woman, who ran a multi-million-dollar company with legendary composure, looked deeply shaken. "Mr. Wilson," she said, then paused, seeming to gather herself. "Mike, please sit down." He lowered himself into the chair across from her desk, confusion mounting by the second. "I've spent the last 3 days trying to find you," she said finally. "I'm sorry?" "I don't understand." "My daughter," she interrupted, her voice catching. "The girl at Riverside Park. The one you pulled from the lake on Sunday. That was my daughter, Lisa." Mike stared at her, the pieces clicking into place. "Your daughter? Is she okay?" Ms. Chen nodded, a tear escaping despite her obvious effort to maintain composure. "Thanks to you, yes. The doctor said if you hadn't been there, if you hadn't acted so quickly." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "I had no idea she was your daughter," Mike said softly. "I just saw someone in trouble. The paramedics said you disappeared before they could get your information. Lisa was unconscious, so she couldn't tell us who saved her. We've been searching everywhere. Then this morning, our security team reviewed the park cameras and identified you." She paused. "Imagine my shock when I discovered her rescuer works in my own company." Mike shifted uncomfortably under her intense gaze. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Ms. Chen said firmly. "They wouldn't." People froze. "You acted. The doctor said your CPR technique was perfect. Where did you learn that?" "I took a class after Penny, my daughter, was born. Never thought I'd actually use it." "You have a daughter?" Something in Ms. Chen's expression softened further. Mike nodded, pulling out his phone to show a photo of Penny with her science fair project. "She's 8. Smart as a whip and twice as stubborn." Ms. Chen smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "Lisa's 15, and equally stubborn. She'd had a fight with me that morning. That's why she was at the park alone, skating on that pond even though it had warning signs." Her voice grew quiet. "I've been so busy with work. I think sometimes she does dangerous things just to get my attention." Mike didn't know what to say. The contrast between their lives felt stark. He struggled to balance work and parenthood from a tiny apartment, while she ran a corporation from her penthouse. Yet they shared the fundamental challenge of raising a child alone. "Lisa wants to meet you," Ms. Chen said suddenly, "to thank you herself. Would you and your daughter come to dinner tomorrow night? I know it's short notice." Mike blinked in surprise. "Oh, I don't know if that's—" "Please," she said, and there was something vulnerable in her voice he never would have expected from the formidable CEO. "It would mean so much to us both." The following evening found Mike and Penny standing nervously outside a towering apartment building in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. Penny kept smoothing down her favorite dress, eyes wide at the doorman and marble lobby. "Is this really where your boss lives, Dad?" she whispered as they rode the elevator to the penthouse. "Yes, sweetie. But remember what we talked about. Ms. Chen is just a regular person who happens to have an important job. And her daughter is probably feeling pretty scared after what happened, so let's be extra kind, okay?" Penny nodded solemnly, clutching the small flower bouquet they'd brought. Ms. Chen opened the door herself, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, a stark contrast to her office persona. "Mike, thank you for coming. And you must be Penny. What beautiful flowers." The apartment was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city lights and modern art adorned the walls. But despite its grandeur, there were touches that made it feel like a home. Photos on shelves, a half-finished puzzle on a side table, school books stacked on the counter. Lisa appeared from down the hallway, moving carefully. She was pale and thin, with her mother's same dark eyes. She looked at Mike with an expression of wonder. "You're him," she said quietly. "You're the one who saved me." Mike smiled gently. "I'm glad I was there to help. How are you feeling?" "Better. The doctors say I can go back to school next week." She turned her attention to Penny. "Your dad is really brave. He jumped into the freezing water like a superhero." Penny beamed with pride. "I know. He's the best dad ever." Dinner was surprisingly relaxed. Ms. Chen, who insisted they call her Veronica, had ordered food from a fancy restaurant, but served it on mismatched plates around the kitchen island, rather than in the formal dining room. Lisa and Penny hit it off immediately, with the older girl showing Penny her collection of science books when she learned about Penny's interest in astronomy. As the girls chatted, Mike found himself opening up to Veronica about the challenges of raising Penny alone since his wife's death. "The hardest part is never knowing if I'm doing it right," he admitted. "Every decision feels so important. Choose the wrong school, say the wrong thing. It all feels like it could have huge consequences down the road." Veronica nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Lisa's father died 2 years ago. Cancer. I thought the business skills that made me successful would translate to parenting solo. They don't, do they?" "Not exactly," Mike laughed softly. "No quarterly reports or performance reviews in parenting. Though sometimes I think those might be helpful," Veronica said with a rueful smile. "At least then I'd know where I stand." As the evening progressed, Mike was struck by how different Veronica was from the intimidating CEO he'd seen from afar. Here in her home with her daughter, she was just a mother, worried, loving, and trying her best just like him. When it was time to leave, Lisa hugged Mike tightly. "Thank you for saving my life," she whispered. "Just promise me you'll stay off frozen ponds," he replied gently. In the elevator down, Penny couldn't stop talking about Lisa and the books she'd shown her. "She said I could borrow any of them. And did you see how she has her own telescope? On the balcony." Mike smiled, his mind still on the evening, on the unexpected connection he'd felt with Veronica, on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, his phone buzzed with a text message. "Thank you for tonight," Veronica had written. "Lisa hasn't smiled like that in months. Would it be okay if we did this again sometime? Both Lisa and I would like that very much." Mike looked at Penny, happily skipping ahead of him, then back at his phone. "We'd like that too," he typed back, feeling as though something important had just begun. Little did he know how this unexpected connection would soon become a lifeline when his own world was about to be turned upside down. 2 weeks had passed since the dinner at Veronica's penthouse. In that short time, something unexpected had blossomed between the two families. What began as a thank-you dinner had evolved into regular meetups, Lisa helping Penny with her science homework, the adults sharing coffee while the girls worked. Last weekend, they'd even gone hiking together at a nearby nature preserve, Penny chattering excitedly the whole way about the different birds they spotted. For Tom, these new relationships felt like a breath of fresh air. Since losing his wife, he'd focused solely on work and Penny, rarely making time for new connections. Now watching his daughter flourish under Lisa's attention and Finding himself looking forward to Veronica's insightful conversation, he realized how isolated they'd become. "Earth to Dad." Penny waved her hand in front of Tom's face. "You're burning the eggs." Tom startled, quickly removing the smoking pan from the stove. "Sorry, kiddo." Got lost in thought. "Thinking about Ms. Chen again?" Penny asked with the directness only an 8-year-old could manage. Tom felt his cheeks warm. "I was thinking about our plans for today. We're meeting them at the Science Museum at noon, remember?" Penny nodded enthusiastically, but then her smile faded. She rubbed her arm absently, and Tom noticed an angry red patch on her skin. "What's that?" he asked, gently taking her arm to examine it. Penny shrugged. "It itches a little." "Started yesterday," Tom frowned. Penny had sensitive skin, but this looked different from her usual eczema flare-ups. "Does it hurt?" "Not really. Just itchy." He made a mental note to pick up some hydrocortisone cream at the pharmacy. "Let's keep an eye on it. If it gets worse, we'll call Dr. Wilson on Monday." By the time they met Veronica and Lisa at the Science Museum, Tom had nearly forgotten about the rash. Penny was her usual energetic self, dragging Lisa from exhibit to exhibit with boundless enthusiasm. "She's good for Lisa," Veronica said, as they watched the girls examine a display about earthquakes. Before the accident, Lisa was so withdrawn. Now she's talking about starting a science club at school. Tom smiled. "Penny's the same way. She's always been bright, but having someone older to look up to, it's made a difference." They wandered through the museum for hours, the girls racing ahead while Tom and Veronica followed at a more leisurely pace, talking about everything from workplace challenges to favorite books. Tom couldn't remember the last time he'd enjoyed adult conversation this much. It wasn't until they were saying goodbye in the parking lot that Tom noticed Penny scratching her arm again. The rash had spread, angry red splotches now covering most of her forearm. "That looks uncomfortable," Veronica said, noticing his concern. "Allergic reaction?" "Maybe," Tom said, though unease was growing in his stomach. "We'll stop by the pharmacy on the way home." By Monday morning, Tom knew this wasn't a simple allergic reaction. Penny had developed a fever overnight, and the rash had spread across her chest and back. When she complained that her joints hurt, Tom called in sick to work and took her straight to the pediatrician. Dr. Wilson examined Penny carefully, her expression growing more concerned as she checked the rash and Penny's swollen joints. "I'd like to run some tests," she said finally, turning to Tom. "This presentation is consistent with several conditions, some more serious than others. Best to rule things out." The next days passed in a blur of doctors' offices, blood draws, and mounting worry. Penny's fever spiked, then dropped, then spiked again. The rash spread further and she became too tired to get out of bed. Tom slept on a chair beside her, waking at every sound, measuring medication doses with shaking hands. When Dr. Wilson finally called with a diagnosis, Tom was both relieved and terrified. Stevens-Johnson syndrome, a rare and serious disorder of the skin and mucous membranes usually triggered by a medication reaction. In Penny's case, likely from the antibiotics she'd taken for strep throat the month before. "She needs specialized treatment," Dr. Wilson explained gently. "I've consulted with experts at Memorial Hospital. They have a pediatric dermatology unit that specializes in these cases." "Of course," Tom said immediately, "whatever she needs." It wasn't until he met with the hospital's financial counselor that the second blow fell. The specialized treatment Penny needed would cost thousands, much of it not covered by his insurance. The medications alone would max out his credit cards, not to mention the hospital stay and follow-up care. "We can set up a payment plan," the counselor suggested, seeing his face. "And there are some assistance programs you might qualify for." Tom nodded numbly, signing forms and trying to focus on the information being provided. None of it mattered. He would find the money somehow. Sell his car, take a second job, whatever it took. Penny's health was all that mattered. He returned to work the following Monday, leaving Penny in the hospital with a neighbor who had offered to sit with her while he put in a few hours at the office. He couldn't afford to lose his job on top of everything else. Tom stared blankly at his computer screen, the code before him meaningless as his mind kept returning to Penny's pale face, the IV in her small arm, the doctor's guarded prognoses. "Wilson," his supervisor's voice broke through his thoughts. "The Chen project needs your input." "Meeting in 5 minutes," Tom rubbed his eyes. "I'll be there." The conference room was already full when Tom slipped in. taking a seat at the far end of the table. Veronica Chen stood at the front of the room, her usual commanding presence somewhat softened by the casual sweater she wore instead of her typical suit jacket. Their eyes met briefly, and her professional expression faltered for just a second. They hadn't spoken since the museum visit. Tom had texted to cancel their planned dinner, citing a vague family emergency, but hadn't elaborated. He hadn't wanted to burden their new friendship with his problems. The meeting dragged on, discussion of project timelines and client expectations washing over Tom without really registering. He made notes automatically, offered input when directly asked, but his thoughts remained with Penny. "Wilson, could you stay behind a moment?" Veronica's voice cut through the shuffle of people gathering their things as the meeting ended. Tom nodded, remaining in his seat as the room emptied. When the door closed behind the last person, Veronica moved to sit in the chair beside him rather than maintaining the distance of the head of the table. "You look terrible," she said frankly. "What's going on? You've canceled our last 2 get-togethers, and now you show up looking like you haven't slept in a week." Tom hesitated. He'd always handled his problems alone, but something in Veronica's direct gaze broke through his resolve. "It's Penny," he said, his voice rough. "She's sick. Stevens-Johnson syndrome. It's a rare reaction to medication that affects the skin and mucous membranes. She's in the hospital." Veronica's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh God, Tom, how serious?" "Serious enough. They're saying she'll recover, but it's going to be a long road. Specialized treatment, medication." He trailed off, not wanting to mention the financial burden. But Veronica was perceptive. "Your insurance doesn't cover it all, does it?" Tom stared down at his hands. "Not even close. But I'll figure it out. I always do. Let me help." Veronica's voice was quiet but firm. "I know people at Memorial. The best specialists? And the cost?" "No," Tom interrupted, perhaps more sharply than he intended. "Thank you, but no. I can't accept that kind of help." "Why not?" "You saved my daughter's life." Her eyes held his, challenging. "You didn't hesitate to jump into freezing water for a stranger. Why is it so hard to accept help in return?" "That was different," Tom insisted. "Anyone would have done that, but they didn't. You did." Veronica's voice softened. "At least let me make some calls. Get Penny the best doctors. The rest we can figure out later." Tom wanted to refuse again, but exhaustion and worry had worn him down, and the truth was he needed help. "For Penny's sake, okay," he said finally. "For Penny?" Veronica's smile was warm with relief. "I'll make some calls right now. And Tom, take the rest of the day off. Be with your daughter. That's an order from your CEO." 3 days later, Penny was transferred to the care of Dr. Patel, one of the country's leading experts in Stevens-Johnson syndrome. The change in her treatment was immediate and significant. New medications eased her pain and slowed the progression of the rash. Special bandages protected her damaged skin. For the first time in weeks, Tom felt a flicker of real hope. What he didn't expect was the subtle shift in how his colleagues treated him. Whispers followed him in the hallway. Conversations stopped when he entered the break room. Even his supervisor seemed more distant, assigning him fewer critical projects. It came to a head when he overheard 2 coworkers talking in the men's room. Unaware he was in one of the stalls. "Chen's playing favorites now," one said. "Wilson's getting special treatment because he saved her kid. Martinez has been waiting 6 months for a promotion, but watch, Wilson will jump the queue." "Can't blame the guy for leveraging it," the other replied. "If I pulled the CEO's kid from a lake, I'd milk it too." Tom felt sick. Is that what people thought? That he was using Penny's illness and Lisa's accident to curry favor? To advance his career? He slipped out without washing his hands, avoiding eye contact with the men at the sinks. Back at his desk, he stared at his computer screen, the unfairness of it burning in his chest. He had never asked for special treatment, had never wanted to be in this position at all. His phone buzzed with a text from Veronica. "Stopped by to see Penny during lunch. She's looking better today. Lisa is bringing her favorite books after school." Despite everything, Tom smiled. Whatever his colleagues might think, whatever complications had arisen, one thing was clear. Penny was getting better. And she had found a friend in Lisa, just as Tom had found something. With Veronica, he wasn't sure what to call their relationship. Friendship, certainly, but there were moments when it felt like it could be more, given time and different circumstances. For now, though, all that mattered was getting Penny well and weathering this storm at work. Tom typed. A quick reply. Thank you for checking on her. Tell Lisa the books will be perfect. Then he turned back to his work, determined to prove himself through his performance rather than any perceived favoritism. The whispers would die down eventually. And in the meantime, Penny was getting the care she needed. That was worth any price, even his reputation among colleagues. What Tom couldn't know was that the greatest test of this new connection was still to come. A choice would soon force him to decide what mattered most, his pride, his career, or the unexpected bond forming between two unlikely families brought together by fate and freezing water. After 3 weeks of specialized treatment, Penny was finally well enough to come home from the hospital. Her skin was healing, the angry rash fading to pink patches that the doctors assured Tom would eventually disappear completely. She was still weak, needing plenty of rest. But her smile had returned, especially when Lisa came to visit, bringing books and craft projects to keep her entertained during her recovery. Tom had converted their small living room into a temporary bedroom so Penny wouldn't have to climb the stairs to her second-floor room. He worked from home when possible, balancing his laptop on the kitchen counter while keeping an eye on his daughter through the doorway. Dad, you're hovering again, Penny called out, not looking up from the bracelet she was making. I'm fine. The medicine doesn't even make me feel sick anymore, Tom smiled. Just checking if you want more juice. Lisa's mom is bringing smoothies when they come over later, remember? Penny reminded him, looking up with an expression far too knowing for an 8-year-old. You should get dressed in something that isn't sweatpants. Tom glanced down at his worn gray sweatpants and faded t-shirt. He hadn't given much thought to his appearance lately, focused entirely on Penny's recovery. What's wrong with these? Penny rolled her eyes in perfect imitation of Lisa. Ms. Chen always looks nice when she visits. You look like you slept under a bridge. Thanks for the fashion advice, Tom said dryly, but he headed to his bedroom to change anyway. Penny wasn't wrong. Veronica always looked put together, even in casual clothes. Beside her, he felt perpetually rumpled. The past few weeks had brought them closer in unexpected ways. Veronica had visited the hospital almost daily, sometimes bringing Lisa, sometimes coming alone with coffee and sandwiches that were definitely not from the hospital cafeteria. They'd talked for hours while Penny slept, about their childhoods, their careers, the challenges of single parenthood. Tom had found himself sharing things he rarely discussed, about his wife's illness, about his fears for Penny's future. In turn, Veronica had revealed glimpses of her own struggles, the pressure of being a woman in a male-dominated industry, her guilt over working long hours while Lisa was younger, her grief when her husband died suddenly of a heart attack 2 years ago. It's strange, she had said one evening, both of them tired from a day of doctor's consultations. I have hundreds of employees, business associates all over the world, but very few people I'd actually call friends. Real friends who know me as more than just the CEO. Tom had understood exactly what she meant. His own social circle had shrunk dramatically after his wife died, when the demands of work and single parenthood left little time for maintaining friendships. Now, pulling on a clean button-down shirt and jeans, Tom wondered where this unexpected friendship was heading. There were moments, a lingering glance, fingers brushing when passing a coffee cup, that suggested it might be evolving into something more. The thought both excited and terrified him. The doorbell rang just as he finished combing his hair. They're here, Penny called, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Tom opened the door to find Veronica and Lisa laden with bags, smoothies as promised, but also what looked like dinner supplies and a stack of board games. We thought we'd cook for you tonight, Veronica explained, stepping inside. Lisa found a pasta recipe she wants to try, and I picked up ingredients. You didn't have to do that, Tom began, but Lisa was already showing Penny the recipe on her phone, and the girls were chattering excitedly about who would do what. Veronica smiled. Honestly, it's as much for Lisa as for you. She's been talking about this recipe all week. Besides, when was the last time you ate something that wasn't takeout or from a can? Tom laughed. Fair point. The evening unfolded in a blur of domestic comfort that Tom hadn't experienced in years. Lisa and Penny made pasta with minimal supervision, flour dusting their cheeks as they rolled out dough. Veronica prepared a salad, moving around Tom's small kitchen with surprising ease. They ate at the coffee table so Penny could stay on her makeshift bed, playing board games well into the evening until Penny's eyelids began to droop. We should go, Veronica said, noticing Penny's fatigue. Little chef needs her rest. Lisa gathered the games while Veronica packed up the remaining food. Tom walked them to the door, suddenly reluctant to see them leave. Thank you for this, he said quietly. It's been nice having people around. The house has felt too quiet lately. Veronica's eyes met his. You don't have to do everything alone, you know. Before he could respond, she leaned forward and brushed a quick soft kiss against his cheek. Get some rest. I'll call you tomorrow. Tom closed the door behind them, his cheek tingling where her lips had touched it. He leaned against the door for a moment, eyes closed, a complicated mix of emotions washing through him. Dad? Penny's voice brought him back to reality. I need my medicine before bed. The next morning, Tom woke to his phone ringing. It was his supervisor, Alan. Wilson, I need you in the office today. Chen wants to see the Henderson project team. Meeting at 10. Tom glanced at Penny, still asleep on the couch. I'm still on half-time remote work this week. Penny's not ready to be alone. This isn't optional. Alan cut in, his voice unusually tense. Find someone to watch her. Chen specifically asked for you to be there, Tom frowned. Veronica hadn't mentioned any meeting last night. I'll figure something out. After some frantic calling, he arranged for their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patel, to sit with Penny for a few hours. He arrived at the office just minutes before the meeting, slipping into the conference room where a dozen colleagues were already seated. Veronica stood at the head of the table, all business in a tailored suit, no trace of the relaxed woman who had cooked in his kitchen the night before. Now that we're all here, she said, nodding briefly at Tom, let's discuss the Henderson timeline. The meeting was straightforward enough. The Henderson project was behind schedule, and Veronica wanted solutions. What felt strange was how she barely looked at Tom, addressing questions to others even on topics where he had the most expertise. By the meeting's end, Tom was thoroughly confused. Had he misread everything about their personal connection? As everyone filed out, Veronica called, Wilson, stay behind, please. When the door closed, leaving them alone, Tom expected her professional demeanor to soften. Instead, she remained standing, maintaining a formal distance. I wanted to discuss a new position that's opening up, she said. Director of Engineering for our new AI division. It would be a significant promotion from your current role. More responsibility, better compensation, direct reports. Tom blinked in surprise. I didn't know I was being considered for something like that. You weren't originally, Veronica admitted. But I've been reviewing personnel files, and your background is ideal. Your work on the Rodriguez project demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. Tom felt a sinking sensation in his stomach as the implications hit him. This was exactly what his colleagues had been whispering about. Special treatment because of his personal connection to the CEO. Is this being offered to me because of my qualifications? He asked carefully. Or because of our personal relationship? Veronica's expression tightened. Your qualifications, of course. I would never— People are already talking, Tom interrupted. About favoritism. About how I pulled your daughter from the lake and now I'm getting special treatment. Since when do you care about office gossip? Veronica asked, a hint of irritation creeping into her voice. Since it undermines everything I've worked for, Tom replied. I've spent 6 years building my reputation here. I want to advance because I've earned it, not because— He trailed off. Not because of what? Our friendship? The fact that you saved Lisa's life? Veronica's voice had cooled considerably. The timing is unfortunate, I'll grant you that. But you're qualified for this position. More than qualified. Tom ran a hand through his hair. I think I need to decline. That would be a mistake. Veronica's professional mask slipped, showing genuine concern. This is a significant opportunity, Tom. Think about what it would mean for you and Penny. The salary increase alone would cover her medical bills. That stung. I can handle Penny's bills. I didn't mean— I know you're trying to help, Tom said, softening his tone. And I appreciate it. But I need to do this my way. Veronica studied him for a long moment. I respect that. The offer remains open if you change your mind. She gathered her papers, all business again. Was there anything else? Tom hesitated, thrown by the sudden shift back to formality. About last night. Last night was personal, Veronica said quietly. This is professional. I keep the two separate. Tom nodded, though the distinction felt artificial given their circumstance. So I should get back to Penny. Of course. Veronica hesitated, then added, Lisa was hoping to visit again tomorrow. Would that still be all right? Penny would love that, Tom said. And you're welcome too, of course. A small smile finally broke through Veronica's professional facade. I'll bring dinner. Something not made by teenage chefs this time. The tension between them eased slightly as they parted ways, but Tom left the office troubled. He had turned down an incredible opportunity out of pride or principle, he wasn't sure which. And while Veronica had seemed to understand, he sensed a new distance between them. That evening, after putting Penny to bed, Tom opened his laptop to check his personal email. Among the usual spam and bills was a message from a former colleague who had left Reynolds Technology the year before. Heard you might be looking for a change. My company is hiring senior engineers. Great benefits, competitive salary. Let me know if you're interested. Tom stared at the message for a long time. He hadn't been looking for a new job. But maybe he should be. A fresh start somewhere without the complications of his current situation. Somewhere he could advance based solely on merit, without whispers about favoritism. Before he could overthink it, he typed a quick reply. Interested in hearing more. Can we talk tomorrow? The next morning, Tom woke feeling lighter, as if simply considering other options had lifted a weight from his shoulders. He made Penny pancakes shaped like stars, smiling at her delight. You're in a good mood, she observed, drowning her pancakes in syrup. Just happy you're feeling better, he replied, which was true, if not the complete truth. His phone rang as they were finishing breakfast. Unknown number. Mr. Wilson, this is Dr. Patel from Memorial Hospital. I'm calling about your daughter's condition. Tom's stomach dropped. Is something wrong? We just saw you 2 days ago. Nothing's wrong, the doctor assured him. Actually, I'm calling about another patient. A teenage girl named Lisa Chen. Lisa? What about her? She's been admitted with complications from her near-drowning incident. There appears to be some delayed damage to her lung tissue, resulting in a severe infection. She's stable, but we're concerned about her blood oxygen levels. Tom felt like the floor had dropped away beneath him. Is she going to be okay? We believe so, but she needs a specialized treatment protocol. The issue is somewhat unusual. Her blood type is quite rare and she needs a transfusion. We're having difficulty finding enough compatible donors. What's her blood type? Tom asked, already reaching for his keys. AB negative. One of the rarest. Do you know your type by chance? Tom stared at the red donor card in his wallet, the one he'd carried for years. I'm AB negative. The doctor's relief was audible. That's extremely fortunate. Would you be willing to come in? Even one donor would make a significant difference in her treatment options. I'll be there in 30 minutes, Tom said without hesitation. He hung up and turned to Penny. Sweetie, I need to call Mrs. Patel to stay with you for a while. Lisa's in the hospital and I need to help her. Penny's eyes widened. Is she going to be okay? Yes, Tom said firmly. She's going to be fine. I'm going to make sure of it. As he drove to the hospital, Tom realized he had completely forgotten about his scheduled job interview. It seemed trivial now compared to Lisa's health. He called to reschedule, briefly explaining the emergency. At the hospital, Tom was taken directly to the donation center. As they prepared him for the blood draw, he asked the nurse, "Has anyone called Lisa's mother?" "Miss Chen arrived about an hour ago," the nurse replied. "She's with her daughter now." Tom nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and apprehension. He hadn't spoken to Veronica since their tense meeting in her office. Would she see his presence here as an intrusion? As another attempt to create a sense of obligation? The thought vanished as quickly as it had formed. None of that mattered now. All that mattered was that Lisa got the help she needed. As the nurse inserted the needle, Tom closed his eyes, thinking of the terrified teenager he'd pulled from the frozen lake months ago. How strange that their lives had become so intertwined since that random encounter. How much stranger still that his rare blood type might now help save her again. The universe, it seemed, had plans of its own. Plans that paid no attention to office politics or personal pride or carefully maintained boundaries between the personal and professional. Plans that had, for reasons Tom couldn't begin to fathom, decided to bind these two unlikely families together through crisis after crisis. What would happen next, Tom couldn't guess. But one thing had become crystal clear. Some connections transcended conventional categories. Some people entered your life by chance but stayed by choice. And sometimes the most unexpected bonds prove to be the strongest. Tom sat in the hospital waiting room, a bandage in the crook of his arm where they'd drawn his blood. 2 hours had passed since the donation, but he couldn't bring himself to leave without knowing how Lisa was doing. He'd called Mrs. Patel twice to check on Penny, who was apparently having the time of her life teaching the elderly woman how to play her favorite video game. The waiting room was nearly empty at this hour. A young couple dozed against each other in the corner, and a middle-aged man paced near the vending machines, occasionally checking his phone. The muted television played a cooking show that no one was watching. Tom. He looked up to see Veronica standing in the doorway. Her normally perfect appearance was disheveled, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, no makeup, wearing what looked like yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt. She'd clearly dressed in a hurry when the hospital called. Tom stood. "How is she?" "Stable." Veronica's voice was ragged with exhaustion. "The transfusion helped. They're giving her antibiotics for the infection. The doctor says she'll need to stay for a few days, but..." Her voice broke. "They think she'll make a full recovery." Relief washed over Tom. "Thank God. The doctor told me you donated blood." Veronica took a step closer. "That you have the same rare blood type Lisa does," Tom shrugged. "Lucky coincidence. Is it, though?" Veronica's eyes searched his. "Sometimes I wonder if anything about our situation is coincidence." The waiting room suddenly felt too public for this conversation. As if reading his thoughts, Veronica gestured toward the corridor. "Walk with me? Lisa's sleeping. They said it would be hours before she wakes up." They wandered down to the hospital's small courtyard garden. The spring evening was mild, the space empty except for them. They sat on a bench beneath a flowering cherry tree, its pale petals occasionally drifting down around them. "You canceled a job interview to come here today," Veronica said after a moment of silence. Tom looked at her in surprise. "How did you know about that?" "David Cooper called my office this afternoon. He wanted to reschedule your interview, but thought he should check if there was really a medical emergency or if you were just having second thoughts." "David works for you?" Tom was confused. "Not directly. His company, Nexus Tech, is a subsidiary of Reynolds. I'm on their board." Veronica gave him a tired smile. "The tech world is smaller than you think." Tom leaned back against the bench, suddenly understanding. "So you know I was looking elsewhere." "I understand why," Veronica said quietly. "The situation at the office has been complicated. I've heard the rumors, too." They sat in silence for a moment, cherry blossoms drifting down around them. "I never asked for special treatment," Tom said finally. "I know." Veronica turned to face him fully. "And I never offered you that position because of our personal connection. You were genuinely the best candidate, but no one would have believed that. They would always think." "Does it matter what they think?" Veronica interrupted. "Really? If you get the recognition you deserve, if your work speaks for itself, does office gossip really matter in the long run?" Tom didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, he'd been so concerned about perceptions that he'd nearly walked away from an opportunity he'd earned, and from people who had become important to him. "I've been thinking a lot since our last conversation," Veronica continued when he didn't respond, "about how hard I've worked to keep my professional and personal lives separate. I thought it was the only way to be taken seriously as a female CEO." She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "But look where that got me. A big empty apartment, a daughter who felt neglected, and hardly any real friends." "You're a great mother," Tom said. "Lisa adores you." "I'm getting better," Veronica acknowledged. "Thanks in part to Wachi." "Nung you with Penny. You never compartmentalize your life the way I do. Being a father isn't something you do. It's who you are." The simple observation hit Tom with unexpected force. It was true. He had never seen parenthood as a role he played, but as an integral part of his identity. Why should his career be any different? Why should he care if others thought his advancement came from connections rather than merit? When he knew the truth. "I've been an idiot," he said finally. Veronica raised an eyebrow. "About which part specifically?" "All of it. Turning down the promotion. Looking for another job. Worrying about what other people think." He turned to face her. "I've spent so long doing everything alone that I don't know how to accept help, or how to believe that good things can happen without some kind of catch." "I understand that better than you might think." Veronica's voice was soft. After Richard died, I buried myself in work because it was the one area of my life I could control. The one place where the rules made sense. A hospital loudspeaker announced the end of visiting hours, the sound muffled by distance. I should get back to Lisa, Veronica said, though she made no move to stand. And I should get home to Penny. Tom didn't move either. Another silence fell between them, but this one felt different, expectant rather than awkward. What if we stopped overthinking everything? Veronica asked suddenly. What if we just let this be what it is? And what is this exactly? Tom asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. Instead of responding with words, Veronica leaned forward and kissed him. Not the quick peck on the cheek from before, but a real kiss, soft and questioning. Tom felt himself respond immediately, his hand coming up to cup her face. When they pulled apart, Veronica's eyes were bright in the dim courtyard lighting. Does that answer your question? Tom smiled. I think we might need to discuss it further. She laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that made her look younger and freer than he'd ever seen her. I'm open to ongoing dialogue. The hospital speaker crackled again, this time paging a doctor. I really do need to check on Lisa, Veronica said reluctantly, and I promised Penny I'd be home for bedtime. Tom stood, offering his hand to help her up. They walked back through the corridors in comfortable silence, fingers loosely intertwined. Outside Lisa's room, they paused. About the job, Veronica said. The offer still stands, but I understand if you want to explore other options. Tom shook his head. I don't need other options. I just needed to get out of my own way. So you'll take the position? On one condition. Tom held her gaze. We tell HR about this, he gestured between them. Everything above board, no secrets. We follow whatever protocols the company has for this situation. Veronica nodded. Agreed. Though I should warn you, those protocols are likely to include some awkward meetings with the board of directors. I think I can handle it. Tom smiled. After all, I've already faced down a frozen lake and a hospital stay. How bad could a few board members be? You'd be surprised. Veronica laughed, but her eyes were serious. Are you sure about this, all of it? Once we start down this road, I'm sure, Tom said simply. Some things are worth the risk. 3 weeks later, Tom stood nervously at the front of the Reynolds Technology Conference Room. The quarterly all-hands meeting had drawn every employee, either in person or via video conference. As the newly appointed Director of Engineering for the AI division, he was expected to present his vision for the department. But before that, Veronica had another agenda. Before we move to department updates, she said from her position at the head of the table, I want to address some rumors that have been circulating through the company. The room went silent, people exchanging uncomfortable glances. Tom felt his mouth go dry. Several months ago, Veronica continued, my daughter was involved in a serious accident. She fell through ice at Riverside Park and nearly drowned. She paused, her professional demeanor slipping for just a moment. She would have died if not for the quick action of one of our employees, who risked his own life to save hers. Murmurs spread through the room, eyes turning toward Tom. What many of you don't know, Veronica went on, is that weeks later, when my daughter experienced complications from that incident, this same employee donated blood that matched her rare type, missing a job interview with another company to do so. The murmurs grew louder. At no point did this employee use these actions to seek advancement or special treatment. In fact, he initially declined a promotion I offered, concerned that others would view it as favoritism rather than recognition of his excellent work. Veronica's gaze swept the room. That employee is Tom Wilson, our new Director of Engineering. Tom felt his face heat as all eyes turned to him. I want to be completely transparent with all of you, Veronica said. In the course of these events, Mr. Wilson and I have developed a personal relationship. We have disclosed this to HR and the Board of Directors, and measures have been put in place to ensure no conflicts of interest in our professional interactions. The room erupted in whispers. Tom could see surprise, speculation, and in some faces, the dawning realization that they had misjudged the situation entirely. Mr. Wilson's promotion was approved unanimously by the board based on his work record alone. With my recusal from the vote, Veronica's voice cut through the chatter. I expect every member of this company to afford him the respect his position and his character deserve. She nodded to Tom, signaling for him to take the floor. As he moved to the front of the room, he caught her eye, seeing in it the same strength and warmth that had drawn him to her from the beginning. 6 months later, on a perfect summer Saturday, two families gathered for a picnic in Riverside Park, far from the pond that had brought them together, but close enough to remember. Penny and Lisa spread a blanket under a sprawling oak tree, unpacking sandwiches and fruit while their parents carried over the cooler. "Can we go to the Science Center after lunch?" Penny asked, now fully recovered from her illness, her energy seemingly boundless. "Only if Lisa helps you with your rocket design afterward," Tom answered, settling beside Veronica on the blanket. "Obviously." Lisa rolled her eyes, but her smile was affectionate. The shy, withdrawn teenager had blossomed in recent months, taking Penny under her wing and finding her own confidence in the process. As the girls chattered about their latest science project, Tom looked at Veronica beside him, her hair loose around her shoulders, laugh lines crinkling around her eyes as she listened to the girls. She caught him staring and raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Just thinking about how differently this day could have gone," he said quietly. "If I hadn't been at the park that day, if Lisa had gone skating somewhere else." Veronica's hand found his on the blanket. "But you were, and she didn't." From across the blanket, Penny piped up, "Dad says it was fate." "Does he now?" Veronica glanced at Tom with amusement. "I thought you were too practical for concepts like fate." Tom shrugged, a smile tugging at his lips. "I've had to revise some of my views lately." "Life's funny that way," Veronica said. "You think you have it all figured out, and then you fall through the ice," Lisa finished. "Or you jump in after someone who does." The four of them looked at each other, linked by chance and choice in something that felt very much like family. Not the family any of them had expected, but perhaps exactly the one they needed. Tom raised his water bottle. "To unexpected rescues. And to what comes after," Veronica added, touching her bottle to his. As their impromptu picnic continued under the summer sun, Tom thought about the long, strange journey that had led them here. A single moment of crisis, a split-second decision to help a stranger in danger. He couldn't have known then that the girl he pulled from the icy water was connected to his future in ways he couldn't imagine. That saving her life would ultimately transform his own. Some called it coincidence, others fate. Tom didn't have a name for it anymore. He just knew that sometimes the greatest acts of courage weren't running into burning buildings or jumping into frozen lakes. Sometimes the real bravery was in opening your heart when you'd long since decided to keep it closed, in allowing yourself to need others after years of standing alone. In the end, perhaps they had all rescued each other,